A white bank manager, Mark Bennett, refused to cash a check for a black woman, Vanessa Carter. He humiliated her by openly questioning the legitimacy of her funds, making it clear he didn't trust her. But what he failed to see was this: Vanessa Carter wasn't just another client, she owned the bank. What happened next would unravel years of hidden prejudice and leave everyone at St. Clair Financial Center stunned. Mark started his day like every other, confident in his position as the gatekeeper of one of the city's most prestigious financial institutions. The morning sunlight illuminated the bank's towering columns, a symbol of wealth and exclusivity. Mark thrived in this environment, a man who believed he knew the right kind of client the bank served. Before we dive into this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, let's get started. Vanessa's arrival shattered that illusion. She entered with a quiet confidence, her tailored black suit exuding authority, her leather briefcase a mark of understated elegance. Heads turned as she walked to the counter. Her mere presence seemed to demand respect, but Mark's assumptions about who belonged in his bank told a different story. "Good morning," Vanessa said, her voice steady as she handed over a check. Chloe Miller, the young teller, glanced at the document and froze. The amount on the check was jaw-dropping, more than most people earned in a lifetime. Trying to remain composed, Chloe gestured toward Mark's office. "Mr. Bennett will need to verify this," she said, her voice faltering slightly. Vanessa's heels clicked with purpose as she crossed the polished marble floors, every step amplifying the quiet tension in the room. When she entered Mark's office, he looked up, his professional mask barely concealing his skepticism. Her presence disrupted his sense of control, and what came next would expose the silent biases that had festered beneath the bank's pristine surface for far too long. Vanessa stepped into Mark Bennett's office, her calm demeanor masking the tension simmering beneath the surface. Mark's eyes flicked to the check she held, his expression tightening as if its mere existence was a challenge to his authority. "How can I help you?" he asked, his tone cool but edged with something Vanessa had encountered many times before: doubt. "I'd like to deposit this check into my account," Vanessa replied, placing it on the desk with deliberate precision. Mark picked it up, his brow furrowing as he scrutinized the amount. The sum was substantial, enough to make even a seasoned banker pause, but Vanessa had provided all the necessary documentation. Yet Mark hesitated. "This is quite a large amount," he said finally, leaning back in his chair. "It's standard procedure to verify the source of funds for transactions like this." His words were measured, but Vanessa caught the undertone, a subtle accusation wrapped in policy. "All the information you need is attached," she said, her voice unwavering. "Feel free to contact my legal firm if you have any questions." Mark's lips pressed into a thin line. "Even so, additional checks may be necessary. I decide how and when we proceed with transactions of this size." His voice grew firmer, and Vanessa noticed the faint glances from staff outside the office, their curiosity barely concealed. Chloe Miller appeared at the door, her nervousness evident as she interrupted. "Mr. Bennett, I've seen Ms. Carter's account before. She's one of our major clients." "That will be all, Chloe." Mark cut her off, his tone sharp and dismissive. Chloe's face reddened as she retreated, throwing an apologetic glance toward Vanessa. Vanessa exhaled quietly, maintaining her composure. She had faced situations like this before, microaggressions disguised as professionalism. "If there's an issue with my check, Mr. Bennett, I'd like to know what it is," she said firmly, folding her hands on her lap. Mark hesitated, his confidence faltering under her steady gaze. "It's unusual for clients like—" He trailed off, catching himself. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, though she kept her tone even. "Clients like what, Mr. Bennett?" Mark straightened, deflecting. "As I said, additional verification is required. You're free to lodge a complaint if you feel it's necessary." Vanessa met his deflection with silence, pulling out her phone. "If you can't process this transaction, I'll escalate the matter," she said calmly, dialing a number. Mark's confidence wavered further as he watched her. His hands gripped the check tighter, as if trying to maintain control, but Vanessa's poise only amplified the imbalance in the room. What had started as a routine transaction now threatened to unravel his carefully cultivated authority. Vanessa pressed the call button on her phone, her composure steady but unyielding. The tension in the room thickened as Mark Bennett's facade of control started to crack. He leaned forward, attempting to assert his authority. "Who exactly are you calling?" he asked, his voice strained with a mix of irritation and unease. Vanessa met his gaze without flinching. "The bank's leadership," she said evenly. "I believe they'd be interested to know how their policies are being interpreted here." Before Mark could respond, the door to his office swung open, and Laura Monroe, the regional director, entered. Her sharp gray suit and no-nonsense expression commanded immediate attention. Mark's reaction was almost comical. His confidence evaporated as he stammered, "Ms. Monroe, I wasn't expecting you." "I'm sure you weren't," Laura interrupted, her tone clipped. Her eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Vanessa before softening. "Ms. Carter, my apologies for any inconvenience. I assure you, this matter will be resolved immediately." Mark's face reddened, but he tried to recover. "We were simply following standard procedure, ensuring all checks." Laura raised a hand, silencing him. "Enough. Standard procedure does not include treating a valued client with suspicion, especially one who has been with this bank longer than you've held your position." Her words were measured but cut through the tension like a blade. Vanessa watched the exchange silently, her expression unreadable. Yet the slight lift of her eyebrows spoke volumes. Laura turned to her, her demeanor professional but apologetic. "Ms. Carter, your check will be processed immediately. Please take a moment to relax in the lounge while I handle this personally." Vanessa nodded, her movements composed as she gathered her belongings. Before leaving, she cast a glance at Mark, calm, deliberate, and heavy with unspoken meaning. It wasn't anger that lingered in her gaze but a quiet reminder, this wasn't over. As the door closed behind Vanessa, Laura turned back to Mark, her expression hardening. "Do you realize the magnitude of your mistake?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. Mark swallowed hard. I was only trying to ensure." "Enough excuses." Laura cut him off. "Do you even know who Ms. Carter is?" Mark's silence spoke louder than words. Laura picked up the folder that had been sitting on his desk, flipping it open. "Vanessa Carter is not just a client. She's the largest shareholder of this bank. She could fire you with a single phone call, and frankly, I wouldn't blame her." Mark's face turned pale as the weight of her words sank in. He opened his mouth to protest, but Laura's icy glare silenced him. "What you've done isn't just unprofessional, it's a reflection of a deeper problem in how you approach your role. That ends today." The door to Mark Bennett's office closed softly behind Laura Monroe, but the tension in the room was palpable. Mark stood rigid, the weight of Laura's words pressing down on him like a vice. He opened his mouth to respond, but Laura silenced him with a raised hand. "There's no need for excuses," she began, her tone sharper than before. "You've crossed a line, no, several lines. What you did today goes beyond policy. It's a blatant failure in judgment, and I won't tolerate it." Mark's face flushed as he stammered. I didn't know who she was. If I had." "That's exactly the problem, isn't it?" Laura interjected. "You didn't bother to know who she was. You saw her skin color, her presence, and decided she didn't belong. That's not just a mistake, Mark. It's a reflection of who you are, and it's unacceptable." Her words hit him like a slap. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Mark's hands clenched the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. Laura stepped closer, her voice lowering but carrying an edge that cut deeper. "Vanessa Carter has done more for this bank than you could in 10 lifetimes. As the largest shareholder, she's the reason this branch even exists. And today, you humiliated her in front of her own staff." "I didn't mean to." Mark started, but Laura's glare stopped him cold. "This isn't just about one incident," she continued, her tone growing firmer. "It's about a pattern. Your attitude, your behavior, it undermines everything we stand for. And it stops here. Mark's shoulders slumped as he realized there was no defense. His carefully built career, his position of power, it was all unraveling before his eyes. Laura placed a folder on his desk, her movements deliberate. You have two options, she said. Option 1, you resign immediately. I'll ensure your departure is quiet, with a letter of recommendation that reflects your past contributions, not today's failure. Option 2, we initiate a formal investigation. And trust me, Mark, you won't like what we uncover. Mark stared at the folder, his mind racing. The thought of resignation was humiliating, but the alternative was unthinkable. He nodded stiffly, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll resign. Laura didn't soften. Good. You'll have until the end of the day to submit your resignation letter. Don't waste this opportunity to leave with dignity. As Mark sat down, visibly deflated, Laura straightened and turned toward the door. But before leaving, she paused and looked back. And Mark, let this be a lesson. Leadership isn't about power. It's about trust and respect. You've lost both. Outside the office, Vanessa Carter stood in the lounge, reviewing documents with the same calm authority she had displayed all day. Laura approached her, her demeanor shifting to one of quiet respect. Ms. Carter, the matter has been resolved, Laura said. If there's anything else you need, please don't hesitate to reach out. Vanessa smiled faintly, her expression a mix of satisfaction and reflection. Thank you, Ms. Monroe. I appreciate your swift action. As Laura walked away, Vanessa turned back to her papers, the weight of the day still lingering. Yet, beneath it all, there was a quiet sense of victory, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated or overlooked. The conference room at St. Clair Financial Center was silent, save for the faint hum of the overhead lights. Vanessa Carter sat at the head of the long glass table, her calm presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Across from her sat the bank's senior leadership, including Laura Monroe, who looked poised yet tense, and Mark Bennett, whose once confident demeanor had all but disappeared. Vanessa placed her pen down deliberately, letting the quiet settle before she spoke. Yesterday's incident was not an isolated mistake, she began, her voice steady but firm. It's a symptom of a larger issue, a culture that allows bias to cloud judgment. As the largest shareholder in this bank, I see it as my responsibility to ensure this ends today. Her words carried weight, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Vanessa's gaze swept across the table, meeting the eyes of each person seated there. This bank thrives on trust, she continued. If we lose that trust, we lose everything. And trust doesn't just come from numbers or profits, it comes from how we treat people, inside and outside these walls. She leaned forward slightly, sliding a stack of documents toward Laura. I'm implementing 3 immediate changes, Vanessa said. First, mandatory training on inclusion and cultural competence for all staff. Second, a review and overhaul of internal policies to eliminate bias. Third, the establishment of an internal complaint system to hold everyone accountable, clients and employees alike. The leadership team murmured quietly among themselves, some nodding in agreement. Laura Monroe, after a moment of reflection, spoke first. These changes are necessary, and I fully support them, she said. Her voice carried conviction, and it was clear she had taken Vanessa's message to heart. Mark Bennett, however, sat silently, his eyes downcast. His resignation letter had already been submitted, and though he remained in the room, his presence was now more symbolic than functional, a reminder of what could happen when power was misused. As the meeting adjourned, Vanessa stood, her movements graceful yet purposeful. She lingered for a moment as the others began to leave, her mind already turning toward the work ahead. Laura approached her quietly. Ms. Carter, I want to thank you for your patience, your leadership, and for giving us a chance to be better, she said. Vanessa smiled faintly. This isn't just about being better, Laura, she replied. It's about doing what's right. For everyone. Later that afternoon, Vanessa returned to the branch where it all began. The atmosphere was noticeably different, quieter, more subdued. Chloe Miller, the young teller who had tried to defend Vanessa earlier, spotted her immediately. Approaching cautiously, Chloe said, "Ms. Carter, it's good to see you again." Vanessa's expression softened as she addressed Chloe. "You showed courage when it mattered most," she said. "That's rare, and it's something this bank needs more of. If you're ever interested in advancing your career, let me know. There's room for people like you in leadership." Chloe's face lit up with gratitude, her voice almost trembling. "Thank you, Ms. Carter. That means a lot." As Vanessa exited the bank, the golden afternoon light streaming through the glass doors, she paused for a moment, looking back. The building, once a symbol of exclusion and unspoken biases, now felt different. Change had begun, not just for her, but for everyone who walked through those doors. Vanessa Carter had proven that one voice, no matter how often silenced or underestimated, could ripple outward and shift an entire system. It was a quiet triumph, but one that would resonate far beyond the walls of St. Clair Financial Center. And as we close this story, we're reminded of the power of standing firm against injustice. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that inspire change. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment of truth.